Hello, joyous ones. Welcome to my channel. I am Cheriel Brown. I am a screenwriter, filmmaker, and I'm a professor of scriptwriting at Howard University. And today I just want to talk about the film The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, or as I like to refer to it as The Hunger Games 4. So I just saw this movie a few weeks ago. At this point, it might have been a couple of months ago. And I think this will be a pretty quick video. I just want to say a couple of things about it. And one, I want to say that the structure didn't really work for a film. I'm not even really sure if the structure worked for a book. And I know that the books are usually very faithfully structured the same way that the movies are usually structured the same way that the books are. They are pretty faithful adaptations. I read all three of the Hunger Game books from the beginning when they did the four movies out of the three books. And I would have to say that I really love the Hunger Games series. So I was excited about seeing the Hunger Games 4, or the actual title of it, The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And I think it was a pretty good title because when you watch the movie, you see why it was named as such. And I was actually very excited to see Viola Davis in the villain's character, the villain's role. So I want to say two things about that movie. One of the things I want to talk about is the structure of the film, and then the other thing I want to talk about is antagonists and what usually is the underlying emotion driving all antagonists. And first of all, I want to talk about structure. So I started writing screenplays when I was 10 years old. And what I loved about writing scripts initially was creating the characters and creating the relationships between the characters. That was the fun part for me. And it took me many years. It was back in 1991. And so I didn't actually meet a professional screenwriter who could teach me anything until maybe 1998, around the time that I was 17. And one of the things that I learned that I wasn't really doing properly was structure. And when I talk about structure, I am talking about how most screenplays are structured with Act One, Act Two, and Act Three. Now, the structure that most people paid attention to when I was 10, from ages 10 to 17 and onward, probably until about 2005, was the structure created by Sid Field in the book Screenplay. He talks about three-act structure, and he uses the example of a 2-hour movie. And for a 2-hour movie, you have 120 minutes. And so the structure is broken down into Act One, 30 minutes, Act Two, 60 minutes, and then Act Three is the final 30 minutes of the film. So if you saw The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, you will see that they had a pretty unconventional structure for that film. Act One, the part one was called they did it in parts, like part one, part two, part three. So what would have been Act One and Act Two and Act Three was called Part One, the mentor, Part Two, the prize, and Part Three, the peacekeeper. Now, the author of that book, I don't have it written down, but I think it's Suzanne Collins. I'm going to look that up real quick just to make sure I'm right. Suzanne Collins, that's a pretty, yes, Suzanne Collins is the author of the book. So I'm sure she structured it the way she structured it on purpose. I'm sure this is something that she wanted to do. She wanted to have it broken down into those three parts of the mentor, the prize, and the peacekeeper, because for whatever reason, she wanted Coriolanus to go back to District 12 and to be a peacekeeper. That's obvious that that was part of the story that she wanted to highlight. But what I will say about it is that the structure may have worked for the book. I haven't read the book yet, and I kind of don't plan to read the book. Um, but it doesn't work for a movie. And this is why. Audiences that have seen the Hunger Games are trained. We are trained to watch the movie and for it to lead up to the games. The games of the Hunger Game is the main event that the audience is waiting for. So in the Hunger Games, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, we're waiting for the games. That happens in the middle of the movie, but there's still like 60 minutes left of the movie. So part one is about 60 to 70 minutes. Part two, the actual Hunger Games, is 35 to 45 minutes. And then the rest of the movie is 50 to 60 minutes. So let's just talk about the tangible outer goal. So every time you have a protagonist, there's something that your protagonist is trying to accomplish. So for Coriolanus, he is the protagonist of the Hunger Games, even though it might seem to be a co-protagonist situation with Coriolanus and Lucy Gray. It really isn't. The main character, the protagonist of this movie, is Coriolanus, and this is a prequel. So we're going back in time from when the original Hunger Games took place to the 10th Hunger Games. And this is where some of the features that we are familiar with got implemented into the Hunger Games because it's a gruesome game. Nobody really wants to watch that. So they had to kind of create incentives for people to want to watch this stuff. And that makes sense. I like that. I think that was creative. I just want to say that I think that the whole Hunger Games franchise is hella creative. Um, like I wish I had come up with it myself, but I didn't. It's not something that I would have ever thought of. But the structure didn't work because even though the protagonist is Coriolanus, his tangible outer goal is to get the plinth prize. Now I might be saying that wrong, but basically that's the plinth prize, PLINTH prize. Okay, so that's his tangible outer goal is to get this prize. So this prize is tied up to the Hunger Games, right? This is the tangible outer goal that was established in Act One. So it becomes this thing where he has to help Lucy win so that he can win. So, they're not going to put somebody from the Capitol into the arena, but they did figure out a way to get him in there momentarily to kind of heighten the suspense and heighten the stakes for him as a character. But this is why the movie doesn't work structure wise, because once the games are over, they take that away from him. They take the prize away from him. So now it's like, okay, it appears that there is no way for him to win this prize. So the audience's investment goes down like almost 100%. You literally feel like when the Hunger Games are over in the movie, that the movie should be over. But you're still sitting there watching the action going on. And it's not a whole ton of action after the games are over. You're sitting there watching the banal action because it's not a whole ton of action going on after the games are over, and you're literally wondering when will this be over. So it would have been better if Suzanne Collins had structured the book, because I know she likes to say, and the filmmakers like to stay faithful to the book. So that means that the whole structure of the book would have needed to have been restructured. So if she had wanted him to be a peacekeeper, I honestly feel like that it maybe should have been a whole nother book that was about that, where we could have gotten some type of action some other kind of way or something. I don't know. But I do feel like the whole movie needed to have been restructured so that his descent into villainy and the Hunger Games and his poverty all kind of lined up together so that these things were happening simultaneously, so that it didn't take a whole hour after the Hunger Games for him to turn into a villain. But they spent so much time trying to establish him as a likable guy, somebody that the audience could relate to. Now, that's not always necessary. I think a lot of times Hollywood falls into the trap of trying to make characters likable, but you don't have to have a character that is likable to hold the audience's interest. You can create um, empathy for the character. You can create, what is the word that I'm looking for? It's a word that I'm looking for that I can't think of right now, but empathy is the closest thing I can think of. And you can create empathy for the character simply because the character is fascinating to watch. And we have seen characters like that in Training Day when Denzel Washington's character plays Alonzo. He's not necessarily a good cop, he's a bad cop, but he's very interesting to watch and he's very charismatic. We have seen the Joker with Joaquin Phoenix, and he is not necessarily a good character at all, but we see how he is treated very badly, and that's where his villainy comes from. And then we have Coriolanus, who is the poorest of the rich people at the Capitol. And we see that his father was deemed a traitor or whatever, that little bit of backstory to kind of explain why his family was actually very, very poor, but he was faking it like they weren't very, very poor. And so, of course, if you're trying to establish some type of empathy from the audience, from the masses, you make them poor because most people can relate to poverty, unfortunately. But like I said, the structure should have been where all of these things coincided together, where it wasn't like three distinct parts of the movie, but more like integrated together so that his descent into villainy could have been happening alongside the games happening. But that didn't happen. So the structure was really, really off. You feel like the movie's over, but you're actually sitting there for a whole nother hour of the movie. The second thing I want to talk about is villains in general. So I kind of feel like the main villain in the Hunger Games 4 in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was Viola Davis's character. And her reasoning behind why the games needed to exist was because at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, she says that it's to remind people who they really are deep down. Now, that's one way to look at it if you think that human beings are rotten at their core. I kind of do believe that. I kind of do believe that humans are kind of rotten at their core. The only thing that gives us any redeeming qualities is our divinity, is that we have a soul. The fact that we have souls is actually what saves us and makes us good people. But the thing I want to talk about villains when you're creating the antagonist in your story, the lowest, basest, most destructive emotion on this planet, Earth, is the emotion of fear. Okay. So does it seem like Viola Davis is afraid of anything, her character in this movie? No, she doesn't seem to be particularly afraid of anything. But that's not the type of fear we're talking about. We're talking about the fear that leads to lack and scarcity. So the people in the Capitol are villains because they are terrified of losing their position in society. They are terrified of becoming like the people in the districts. So they have to keep the districts in their place and to keep them from uprising again. Okay? Because they don't want to lose their cushy places in society. So one of the things that I talk about often on my YouTube channel, that I talk about in my book, The Secret of Life Through Screenwriting, which if you are interested in purchasing my book, The Secret of Life Through Screenwriting, how to use the law of attraction to structure your screenplay, create characters, and find meaning in your script, there's a link on my YouTube channel. That will take you to the Amazon page where you can purchase my book. But in the book, I teach the law of attraction in terms of screenwriting, in terms of act one is the ask, act two is believing in what they want to accomplish, and act three is the receiving of what they want, what the tangible outer goal is. So this is everybody's journey in life. Everybody in life is trying to have a happy life full of the things that they want. Love, material success, money. This is some of the things that everybody wants. Safety, peace. Okay. So when you look at the villains in movies, even if they seem to be brave and have a lot of valor, these people at the core of themselves are acting out of fear. Even if they believe that they are acting out of love for their loved ones or for their friends and family, their main motivation is fear of losing their status in society. That is pretty much every villain's base at the core of their emotion. Every villain is afraid. They're afraid and they are buying into this story of lack and scarcity. So that's all I wanted to say about the Hunger Games, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. When you are writing your villains, Coriolanus starts off as somebody that we can sympathize with. I actually, honestly, I could sympathize with him throughout the whole movie because the fear of poverty is a real thing. You know, no anybody who's experienced poverty doesn't want to return to that state, or they want to escape the state of poverty and they want to have some type of security. So that was done well because I feel like we can relate to that throughout the whole movie. It does look like at the end of the movie that he shoots Lucy Gray, and again, a spoiler alert. Sorry. It does look like he shoots her. Um, that's the way it makes it look like it plays out. And he might not even be sure if he actually shot her because it doesn't show him finding her body or going to look for her body to dispose of it. So, or they just cut that part out on purpose. But yes, I mean that's the core of it. The villains in the movies are acting out of fear. That's what people in real life are acting out of when they try to suppress and oppress other people and try to keep their status in society. Because nobody wants to be poor. Nobody wants to be on the bottom rung of society. But that's not how the planet has to be. That's not how it has to be. And I think that as writers, we need to start writing more stories about the alternative of how the planet could be instead of reinforcing this trauma. Okay. Because when we create movies like The Hunger Games and we create television series like The Handmaid's Tale, all we are doing is giving these wicked, evil people a blueprint to live by. We are giving them blueprints of what they can do to terrorize society. And so we really need to start figuring out how we can make movies and television series that show the opposite way that life and society can be. And because we have to be cautious of what we're putting out into the world. Okay. But again, that's all I have to say for today. Until the next video, go and be creative, go write something, and please, 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 whatever you do, try to contribute to making the world a better place. Bye.